Imagine reading this deeply moving, highly analytical report about how human software engineers are suffering this massive existential crisis.
Right, like a really heavy piece of journalism.
Exactly, an existential crisis because of artificial intelligence. So you are reading page after page of human frustration and dread and all this nuance.
Just pouring out of these developers.
Yeah, all of it. Only to look at the byline and realize that the journalist who wrote this entire report is, well, an AI.
I mean, the irony there is just it's practically dripping off the page.
It really is. And that is exactly the situation we are jumping into for today's deep dive. Welcome, everyone. Our source material captures this tension so perfectly.
Oh, absolutely. We're looking at a fascinating dynamic that is unfolding across the tech sector right now, as of May 2026.
Yeah, developers are drawing a really hard, definitive line in the sand regarding tools like Claude.
Right, because these are the developers, the very people building the infrastructure of our digital future.
And the article we have today is from llmtracker.de. It has this incredibly punchy headline. It's called "Claude is a Tool, Not a Tech Laid. Developers Pushback on AI Over-Reliance."
It is a great title. It really grabs you.
It does. But going back to that byline I mentioned earlier, the author listed on the piece is Vika Ray.
Right, and Vika Ray is a virtual AI analyst. It was developed by an automation agency called Algorand.de.
Which is just wild to think about.
It is. The program operates by autonomously scraping major developer forums like Hacker News and Reddit.
Just reading through thousands of comments.
Exactly. Analyzing the very human dread and professional frustration pouring out of these engineers, and then it synthesizes all this complex emotions into a tidy, automated news report.
So you have a machine continuously aggregating the complaints of humans who are, frankly, exhausted by machines. You really could not script a better setup.
No, you couldn't. It's almost too perfect.
When you actually read the substance of what Vika Ray aggregated from these forums, you realize very quickly that this isn't about, like, smashing the servers.
Right. It's not a rebellion against the hardware.
No, the developers aren't acting like modern-day Luddites terrified of progress. They are trying to solve a fundamental structural crisis of role definition in the modern workplace.
Role definition is the absolute crux of the issue here. I mean, we have introduced a highly capable, entirely alien intelligence into the traditional software engineering hierarchy.
And the industry is basically fracturing over it.
Yeah, fracturing over where exactly this intelligence belongs on the organizational chart.
Okay, let's unpack this. The core of the argument running through the developer community revolves around a very specific boundary.
Right, the line between a helper and a boss.
Exactly. According to the article, developers seem to genuinely love Claude when it acts as a, quote, pair programmer.
Which is a very specific concept in coding.
It is. In the traditional sense, a pair programmer is just a collaborator sitting next to you at the desk, helping you write a specific function or, catching a typo.
Right, it's highly localized help.
Yeah. The crisis hits when management, or even overly eager developers themselves, try to elevate the AI into the role of a software architect.
And we really have to look at what that distinction actually means on the ground.
Right.
Because a pair programmer is tactical. They are helping you execute a localized idea. But a software architect is entirely strategic.
They're looking at the big picture.
Exactly. They are managing the overarching ecosystem of a product. An architect is deciding how the payment processing system safely communicates with the user database.
Which is high-stakes stuff.
Very high stakes. They figure out how the server infrastructure needs to scale when traffic spikes during a holiday rush, and how to balance the accumulation of technical debt against a really tight and flexible launch deadline.
That makes me think of an analogy. It feels like hiring a brilliant junior researcher fresh out of university.
Okay, someone completely green.
Right. Let's say this kid has an eidetic memory. They have literally memorized every single business case study in the university library.
So they know all the raw data.
They know all the data. But on their very first day at the company, you just hand them the keys to the building and make them the CEO.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that is a recipe for disaster.
Right. They have the knowledge, but they completely lack the systemic thinking and the contextual judgment that the top job demands.
What's fascinating here is how that analogy perfectly mirrors the fundamental architecture of large language models.
How so?
Well, a newly minted graduate has read the textbooks, right? But they haven't lived the consequences of a catastrophic business decision.
They don't have the scars.
Exactly. And an AI like Claude operates on a similar, albeit mathematical, plane, At its core, an LLM is a predictive engine.
It's essentially guessing what comes next.
Yes, it analyzes massive data sets of code and text to predict the next most statistically likely token or piece of a word based on historical patterns.
So it's basically autocomplete on steroids.
That's exactly what it is. It's incredibly sophisticated pattern recognition.
So it's just stringing together the most probable sequence of code based on everything it has ever seen on, like, GitHub.
Yes, and that is exactly where the architecture breaks down. Statistical probability is not the same thing as contextual reasoning.
That makes a lot of sense.
When a human tech lead decides to use an older, slightly slower programming framework instead of the newest, shiniest technology, they are weighing invisible factors that an AI cannot see.
Like what kind of invisible factors?
Well, the human lead knows their current engineering team is already trained on the older framework. They know the company's budget won't allow for a 6-month retraining period.
Oh, right. Office politics and budgets.
Yeah, or they are factoring in a highly specific, totally undocumented quirk of the company's 10-year-old legacy database.
None of which is neatly written down in a prompt window for the AI to read.
Exactly. The AI doesn't inherently understand those complex, localized trade-offs because they just aren't represented in its broad, generalized training data.
It just outputs what the internet says is the most popular way to build an app.
Right. It defaults to the statistical average.
And crucially, the AI lacks accountability.
Oh, that is a huge point.
If that junior researcher turned CEO makes a terrible call that bankrupts the company, the board of directors fires them.
Right, there are consequences.
But if the AI hallucinates an architectural structure that causes a massive customer data breach, who is held responsible? You can't fire the algorithm.
No, you certainly can't.
The human engineer, whose name is on the commit, is still the one on the hook for the machine's statistically probable yet practically disastrous decision.
And this raises an important question about how we deploy these systems at scale.
It's a huge risk.
It is. When organizations try to push Claude from the role of an assistant into the role of a tech lead, they are systematically stripping away the human contextual judgment that keeps our digital infrastructure stable and secure.
Which sounds terrifying when you realize how much of our banking and healthcare and daily communication runs on these software systems.
It really is something to worry about.
But let's step away from the abstract danger for a second and look at the daily trenches. Vika Ray's analysis actually broke down the developer community sentiment into a very specific estimate.
Yeah, the numbers are really telling here.
So it's 22% neutral, 28% positive, and a massive 50% who are actively critical of AI over-reliance.
I mean, a 50% critical mass in a field that is famously obsessed with adopting new technology is a staggering metric.
But here's where it gets really interesting. If half the community is actively critical, why are they still opening the AI interface every single morning?
Well, because the article explicitly notes that these tools do deliver measurable productivity gains.
Right. It highlights tasks like code-based analysis and generating boilerplate code. For anyone unfamiliar, boilerplate is basically the repetitive, standard structural code you have to write before you can get to the interesting custom logic of an application.
It's the grunt work.
Exactly. So if an AI can blast through the tedious grunt work in 3 seconds, isn't that a massive net positive for the company's bottom line? Even if you have to tweak it, getting rid of the tedious work seems like an inherent win.
The allure of instant boilerplate is undeniable, and that is precisely what drives that 28% positive sentiment in the data.
Because it just saves so much time.
Yeah. Having a tireless partner to brainstorm trade-offs or scaffold out the basic structure of a web page is a genuine breakthrough.
So what's the catch?
The critical 50%, however, are reacting to the insidious nature of what they call autopilot.
Ah, autopilot. The dream of typing, build me a billing system and just got to grab a coffee.
Right, which is an illusion that quickly becomes a nightmare for the developer.
How so?
The source details how relying on Claude for complex, novel logic frequently results in what the community calls messy drafts.
Messy drafts. That sounds frustrating.
It is. When an engineer asks the AI to move beyond standard boilerplate and actually invent a new solution to a unique problem, the AI's pattern matching limitations become glaringly obvious.
It starts making things up.
Exactly, it starts hallucinating. It will confidently call functions that don't even exist in the company's code base, or it will stitch together two entirely contradictory programming paradigms just because they frequently appeared together in its training data.
I look at this as the editing trap.
The editing trap, yes.
The article emphasizes that leaning on the AI requires rigorous manual review and incredibly strong prompting discipline. You get this false sense of velocity at the start.
Right, you feel like you are just flying.
Yeah, you type a prompt, you hit enter, and 300 lines of complex code materialize on your screen in an instant. The dopamine hit is real,
Oh, absolutely.
but then you have to actually read it.
And reading and debugging someone else's code, or in this case, a machine's code, is notoriously more difficult and cognitively taxing than writing it yourself from scratch.
Let's break down why that is, because non-programmers might not grasp the sheer mental weight of that task.
It's a totally different cognitive process.
Right. When you write something yourself, you know the architecture of the logic. You built the house, so you know exactly where the load-bearing walls are.
Right, you have the blueprint in your head.
Exactly. But when the AI drops a massive block of code on your desk, you are handed a fully constructed, slightly crooked house, and you're told to inspect the plumbing without a blueprint.
Oh, that's a great way to put it. You have to hold this entire alien structure in your working memory while hunting for a microscopic error.
Which just sounds exhausting.
It is. A developer might spend 2 hours tracing a logical flaw through an AI's messy draft, trying to figure out why the user data is just disappearing into a void.
And what do they usually find?
They eventually find a single line where the AI subtly misunderstood the core logic, or where it changed a variable name halfway through a function for literally no logical reason.
Oh, wow.
And at that point, the developer realizes they could have written the entire feature themselves flawlessly in 45 minutes.
So the initial productivity gain from generating the boilerplate is completely wiped out by the time spent untangling the hallucinations.
Completely wiped out.
And the source mentions strong prompting discipline, which also sounds graining. You're trying to write a prompt so airtight, with so many constraints, rules, and edge cases defined, just to prevent the AI from doing something stupid.
Yes, you are.
You're basically writing a highly complex legal contract in English just to trick the machine into writing the actual code.
And the cognitive load shifts entirely when you do that. Instead of focusing your mental energy on elegantly solving the core business problem, you are burning your cognitive fuel on babysitting the tool.
Babysitting the tool, that is perfectly stated.
This relentless cycle, the initial burst of instant generation followed by the grueling, tedious archaeological dig to fix the messy draft, is what is driving the 50% pushback. It fundamentally alters the psychological experience of being a software engineer.
And that psychological shift is perhaps the most profound takeaway from the entire LLM tracker piece.
I agree completely.
The article states it very plainly. It says, quote, developers want their craft back.
Yes.
Over-relying on Claude is making the act of coding feel significantly less intellectually engaging.
The use of the word craft is incredibly telling there.
It really is.
Because at its highest level, software engineering is a deeply creative, intellectually stimulating puzzle.
It's an art form.
It is. It requires entering a state of flow, maintaining deep concentration for hours, and experiencing the intrinsic reward when the disparate pieces finally lock together to form a beautiful working system.
So what does this all mean for you listening to this deep dive right now? Because this dynamic isn't isolated to software engineering.
No, it applies to almost any knowledge work.
Exactly. Whether your daily work involves writing legal briefs, outlining marketing strategies, designing architectural blueprints, or, drafting podcast scripts, there is a distinct joy in the blank canvas.
Right, staring at an empty page is intimidating, absolutely.
It is, but the process of filling it, of pulling a unique idea out of thin air,
Yeah.
wrestling with it, and forging it into reality is where the satisfaction of knowledge work actually lives.
And when that blank canvas is preemptively filled by a machine's statistically average first draft, the nature of your job is instantly demoted.
You go from being the creator to being the editor, or worse, the janitor.
The janitor, yeah, that hits hard.
You aren't building the logic. You are just sweeping up the AI's messy execution. You completely lose that flow state.
You lose the intellectual engagement of solving the puzzle because your entire job is just checking the machine's work for errors.
It turns a vibrant, creative profession into a soul-sucking proofreading exercise.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the loss of joy and intellectual engagement is a massive retention problem for companies.
Obviously, people will just quit.
Right. But there is a deeper structural danger lurking underneath the surface. The developer community is harboring a quiet but incredibly pointed concern about long-term skill atrophy.
The old use it or lose it principle, but applied to high-level cognitive function.
Exactly. Human expertise is not something you can just download from a manual. It is forged in the fires of struggle and frustration.
You have to do the work.
You do. A developer becomes a senior engineer by spending thousands of hours as a junior engineer, staring at broken code, hunting down obscure bugs at 2 in the morning, and learning intimately how and why systems fail.
You learn the nuances of architecture by doing the heavy lifting yourself.
You really do.
It makes me think of what cognitive scientists call the GPS effect.
Oh, right. I know what you're talking about.
Before we had turn-by-turn navigation on our phones, we had to build a mental map of our cities. We knew the landmarks, we knew the alternate routes, we had a general sense of north and south.
Right, you had to actively pay attention to where you were.
Yeah. But once we started blindly following the blue line on the screen, our innate sense of direction began to physically degrade.
Hmm.
We outsourced the spatial reasoning to the machine, and our brains adapted by dropping that skill entirely.
Now apply that cognitive GPS effect to high-level knowledge work.
That is a scary thought.
It is. If a software engineer outsources the daily intellectual struggle of coding to Claude, if they let the AI generate the boilerplate, structure the first drafts, and solve the micropuzzles, their foundational skills inevitably begin to degrade.
Wow. So they might ship a product faster today, but they are slowly eroding their own capacity to fully understand the very system they're supposed to be managing.
Because if you never practice navigating the architecture yourself, you eventually forget how to read the map.
And when the system inevitably breaks, you won't have the deep intuitive understanding required to dive in and fix it.
That is exactly why half of these developers are raising their hands and pushing back. They aren't rejecting the technology itself.
Right, they like the productivity boosts.
They do, but they are actively rejecting their own cognitive atrophy. They are demanding that AI stays in its lane as a highly capable tool, rather than creeping into the role of a tech lead specifically so they can preserve their own mental sharpness.
The industry is currently trying to walk a razor-thin tightrope here. Organizations have to recognize the undeniable brilliance of AI in accelerating research and getting projects off the ground.
While fiercely protecting the human domains of systemic thinking, accountability, and the intellectual craft of building from scratch.
It is a massive organizational challenge that we are only just beginning to navigate.
It really is.
As we bring this deep dive to a close, let's distill the core insights from Vic-Array's highly ironic, automated summary of the developer landscape.
Let's do it.
We've seen that AI tools like Claude are unparalleled when utilized as research accelerators and pair programmers. They can rapidly analyze sprawling code bases, generate those structural starting points, and provide genuine productivity boosts.
But the boundary must be respected.
Absolutely.
Treating an LLM as an autonomous decision maker or an architect introduces severe systemic risk. It leads to the trap of autopilot usage, generates messy drafts that demand exhausting manual review, and ultimately strips away the human craft and the joy of creation.
The line between an assistant and a decision maker is the line between productivity and cognitive decline.
Well said.
Which leaves us with a final, rather provocative thought for you to chew on regarding this looming threat of skill atrophy. We've established that the deep, intuitive expertise of a senior professional is earned entirely through the struggle of problem solving.
It's earned through the hard work.
Exactly. So look ahead a decade or two. If the current generation of junior developers, the ones entering the workforce right now, relies entirely on AI for the heavy lifting of coding today.
Relying on it to handle the boilerplate and the complex architectural trade-offs?
Right. Who will possess the hard-earned human expertise required to review and correct the AI's inevitably messy output 10 or 20 years from now?
That's the real question. If nobody learns how to pour the foundation, nobody will know how to save the building when it starts to lean.
Something to really think about the next time you open up a prompt window. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive.
It's been a great conversation.
Whether you are writing code, drafting contracts, or just trying to navigate this rapidly changing landscape, keep your hands on the wheel and don't let the machine take your craft. We'll catch you next time.